Today, we are just delighted to have Sharon Hixson as our speaker. Sharon has been the hardworking planner behind the last two drive-up native plant sales, and they've been so well organized and very just have gone so smoothly. I wish everything that we volunteer for has been run as well as that. But those of us who worked for the setups and sales have been so appreciative of her thorough planning and her organization. Sharon's going to be speaking today on beneficial arthropods. She received an undergraduate degree in biology, but unable to find a job in that area, worked in the energy field for many years. She and her husband moved to the Hill Country in 2008. And after having had much contact with Jim Stanley through his newspaper column, always interested in plants, Sharon was certainly fertile ground for Jim's passion for the Hill Country. And she took the Master Naturalist course in 2010 at Priscilla Stanley's urgings and started volunteering at Riverside Nature Center, the plant sales, before coordinating them starting in 2015 when the Stanleys retired. Sharon's other activities besides volunteering at Riverside Nature Center, including being a member of the PGARP, which is helping people to plan their and evaluate their lands. And she also monitors new members of Master Naturalist classes. She enjoys working in her native gardens at home, horseback riding, and being active in her homeowners association. We're so excited to welcome Sharon today in her presentation on beneficial arthropods, which she likes to call Texapods. Take it away, Sharon.
Okay, thank you. Let's see if I can do this correctly. I have Pam here to help me. Share. Then I have to start. There we go. Right here. Come on, let's go. Okay. Does everybody see it?
Yes.
Look at this.
Yes.
Can I just minimize it? Okay. So let me know if you can't hear me or have any problems. But first, I want to start off and say I am not an arthropod expert. My husband Mel is the brains behind this presentation, but he doesn't like to speak in front of groups. I put the PowerPoint together and I do the talking. And nearly all of the photos in this presentation are from the internet. Maybe I do need a page turn. We're all familiar with beneficial insects like bees, butterflies, praying mantis, and ladybugs, but there's a lot more, and this presentation barely skims over the basics. Sometimes it's hard to separate beneficial bugs from pests, so this covers a little bit about both, and a more accurate title for this talk would be Arthropods You're Likely to See in Your Garden. So first, to clarify, as Sandra said, Texapods, that's just kind of a little tongue-in-cheek title. It's not really a word. We just made that up. And this slide defines what an arthropod is. It's an invertebrate animal having an exoskeleton, a segmented body, and paired jointed appendages. It includes more than 80% of all described animal species. Worldwide, they range in size from microscopic to the Japanese spider crab that has 12-foot claw to claw size. The group consists of 4 main subgroups, and it includes your common garden critters such as scorpions, spiders, centipedes, mites, sow bugs, and insects. So crustaceans are chiefly aquatic and typically have body covered in a hard shell or a crust. Wood lice are the only crustaceans that are adapted to live their entire life on land, and they feed on decaying organic matter and do a great service as composters. play a vital role in the natural carbon dioxide cycle. Unfortunately, when there's lots of them, they also feed on plants. So arachnids, often scary to some of us humans, some are venomous. They have a body divided into 2 parts, 8 legs and no antennae. Spiders are efficient predators and do a huge job controlling pests in our gardens. And the 3 spiders that are shown here are very common in our gardens. Harvestmen, also known as daddy longlegs, are often mistaken for spiders, but they're more closely related to scorpions. Contrary to urban legend that claims they're venomous, they are not. They don't have venom glands or fangs, and their mouth is too small to bite a human, and they are medically harmless. They're beneficial in the garden. They are insect predators and scavengers feeding on aphids, beetles, caterpillars, earthworms, flies, mites, small slugs, snails, and spiders. During summer days, they often cluster together in large numbers in protected locations. And this, by the way, is one of my pictures. We had this at our house, it's kind of on our front porch. You know, we don't get too many salesmen coming up on the front porch. During the summer days when they're clustering together, when they're disturbed, they vibrate their body. It's called bobbing. And after the sun goes down, they wander about in search of food. And wrens, summer tanagers, and other birds feed on them. Scorpions, we're all pretty familiar with those. They insect spiders and other scorpions and pretty much anything that they can catch. So mites are 8-legged and many of them are terrible garden pests. The larvae of the common harvest mite is our dreaded chigger. Some mites are parasitic on things like honeybees, and all mite species look very similar, except the predatory kind are larger and tend to run about at higher speeds. And in the absence of prey, predatory mites eat pollen and nectar and can revert to sucking plant juices. The most effective way to utilize predatory mites is as a biological control to release them in your garden or greenhouse when a spider mite or a thrip infestation is occurring. And in the presence of a food source, spider mites or thrips, the predatory mites will feed and reproduce quickly until the infestation is under control. So myriapods, another major group, have a body made up of many segments, and each segment has a pair of legs. Centipedes are fast, predatory, and venomous, hunting mostly at night for insects and other prey. The first pair of legs are modified to function as claws used to capture prey. And the claws are connected to poison glands that can inject venom to subdue captured prey. And although most centipedes in Texas are relatively small, one larger species, the Scolopendroheiros, and I'm not going to guarantee that I'm pronouncing all of these names correctly, so just bear with me on that. Scolopendroheiros can reach over 9 inches when full grown. Millipedes fulfill an important role in breaking down and decaying plant material, and they occasionally damage seedling plants by feeding on stems and leaves. And other myriapods includes tiny symphilins and pauropods that live in soil, and they eat decaying matter, and they sometimes feed on root hairs. Insects are the largest and most diverse group of arthropods who will make up the bulk of this presentation. Potentially over 90% of animal life forms on Earth are insects. The total number of living insect species is estimated at between 6 and 10 million. Insect bodies have 3 sections: head, thorax, and abdomen. Individuals in many of the families fall into both categories as pest and beneficial. Many insects have a different function as larvae than as an adult. And the beautiful butterfly you see pollinating your flowers most likely has a larval form that eats some of your plants. So many insects are beneficial as an important food source for other animals. So for this presentation, we'll discuss common garden insects in a taxonomic order by order basis. The taxonomists are constantly reclassifying insects, so different references will often place an insect in a different order. And entire programs could be devoted to each individual order. But this program skims over all of these and a few more, except for not the Hymenoptera. Scaled whiteflies, mealybugs, spittlebugs, and aphids are very, very interesting, but we don't consider them to be beneficial in our gardens, except that they provide food for insect predators. So first, we're going to go over a few minor orders of insect species. The wood cockroach is a native species. It's common in our gardens. The males are winged, the females are not. They feed on decaying organic matter and are valuable decomposers. This species generally doesn't invade homes, and they're a food source for other animals. Earwigs are common in gardens. They're normally predatory on small insects. They can become a pest on flowers and plants when prey is scarce. Females guard their eggs and the newly hatched nymphs. And the European earwig first became established in Rhode Island in the early 1900s and is now locally abundant coast to coast. Walking sticks are not necessarily beneficial, but they're certainly interesting, and they're completely harmless. Their leaf eaters are common in Texas, and we have some of the largest and the most colorful. They're not big pests in the garden and are not numerous enough to cause major damage to our trees and vines. And this photo of a northern walking stick shows how they typically rest with their front pair of legs straight out in front of them. And our jumbo species, Megaphasma, feeds on wild Mustang grape. Females can reach 7 inches or more in length. Mantids, or the praying mantis, are all garden predators and very beneficial, though they're not super abundant. They range from small 1-inch long, fast-moving ground mantids to larger, slower forms like the Carolina mantis. And watch for the Carolina mantis egg cases on bare twigs in the winter. And newly hatched nymphs resemble tiny versions of the adult. So now on to some of the more major insect orders. And these beautiful airborne hunters are efficient predators of small flying insects, especially mosquitoes and flies. Generally, dragonflies are larger, more robust, and hold their wings horizontally at rest. Damselflies are smaller, more slender, and fold their wings vertically at rest. We often see dragonflies coasting through our gardens, and damselflies are more commonly found near streams and ponds. And both have fully aquatic larvae that are also fierce predators. So these small, with a few exceptions, garden predators are called nerve-winged insects because their wings have a pattern of net-like cells, and they tend to hold their wings folded lengthwise along their body. Green lacewings are most common, and the brown species is less so. And both larvae and adults are insatiable predators on common garden pests, especially aphids. Larvae resemble ladybug larvae and are sometimes called aphid lions or aphid wolves. Some lacewing larvae pile dry carcasses on their bristly backs or decorate themselves with other debris. And this may act as a disguise against ants that vigorously protect the aphids. Mantis flies are quite small and look like a praying mantis crossed with a lacewing. Adults are predatory, using their front legs to capture insects in the same manner as a praying mantis. And the larvae of many species are predators of spider eggs. When a larvae hatches, it actively seeks a female spider upon which it rides until the host spins an egg sac. And once inside the spider egg sac, the larvae feeds on the spider eggs until it pupates and eventually emerges as an adult. And the picture on the lower right shows a spider carrying a mantis fly larvae. Snake flies are small, like the mantis fly, and they're a relict group and have been considered living fossils. An adult snakefly resembles a lacewing but has an elongated thorax, which together with the mobile head gives the group its common name. And these are important predators of aphids and mites. Adult females have a large, sturdy ovipositor, which they use to deposit eggs in crevices or under bark. And the larvae are active predators of small insects under loose bark of dead trees or in leaf litter. Adult antlions don't draw very much attention, most often seen flying weakly after being flushed from tall grass. They feed on nectar and pollen and occasional small insects. The larvae are usually out of sight, but you often see their small pit traps in fine, dry soil. They are voracious predators of small insects. So when an ant or other tiny insect strays over the tip of the pit, the larvae kicks up little fountains of dirt to shower its victim and hasten its descent into the jaws of doom. The stubby-legged larvae, also known as a doodlebug, can only walk backwards, leaving little trails across the surface when changing the location of its trap. This insect is included because it's huge, and if you see one in your yard, you might wonder what it is. Adults do not feed, and the males have huge sickle-like jaws, but are completely harmless. And the females can bite if they're molested. The larvae are fully aquatic and are fierce predators known as helgrammites that are eagerly sought by fishermen for bait. So all orthopterans have chewing mouth parts, and we think of them as garden pests. But most species are omnivorous, grazing on plants and scavenging dead insects and sometimes live prey. Crickets and katydids are beloved for their summer night serenades. And these insects go through a simple metamorphosis with younger stages usually resembling small and wingless versions of the adult. There are a number of grasshopper species that are common in Texas, and these are two that you're most likely to see in your garden. Both are plant eaters. The Carolina locust is rather drab, but it looks like a beautiful butterfly when it flies off. And the differential grasshoppers have black chevrons on their hind legs, and it has become a pest of many food crops. So grasshoppers can be pests, but they are an important food source for birds, lizards, and other animals. And grasshoppers also make excellent fish bait. So katydids are common grasshopper lookalikes, except they have long, thready antennae, while grasshoppers have shorter club antennae. And we enjoy hearing their loud, raspy calls on hot, humid summer nights. They generally don't do major damage to plants. Most of them are omnivorous, feeding on plants, seeds, and occasionally other insects. But there's one species that's quite different, and I lost my cursor. Where'd it go? There it is. Okay. Quite different. The greater arid land katydid is also called the red-eyed devil. It's aggressive, carnivorous, and a savage garden predator on other grasshoppers and katydids. It uses its spiny legs to grasp prey and its massive mandibles for tearing and chewing. It puts on quite a show when it feels threatened, as that picture on the right-hand side is showing. Crickets are our celebrated songsters of the insect realm. And there are several species, but these are the two that you're most likely to see or hear. Field crickets primarily eat rotting plant matter, but will eat just about anything. And an interesting fact, the calling song of the male field cricket is intended to attract a female cricket, but the song can also draw a small nocturnal female parasitic fly called an Ormia fly that plugs the cricket with an egg in what amounts to a drive-by shooting. Tree crickets feed mostly on aphids and other soft-bodied insects, sometimes nibbling on foliage and fruits. They're also known as thermometer crickets because their chirping speeds up in higher temperatures. And tree crickets are often overlooked, but the males' trilling choruses are hard to miss. Nathaniel Hawthorne once wrote, "If moonlight could be heard, it would sound like that." Hymenoptera are the true bugs. We tend to call all insects bugs, but entomologists call insects in this group true bugs. They look similar to beetles, but they have a triangular shield between the wings. And like grasshoppers and crickets, these insects go through simple metamorphosis, with younger stages resembling small wingless versions of the adult. They have sucking, beak-like mouth parts that are tucked beneath the chest when not in use. And this is a large group common in gardens and are mostly plant-sucking pests with piercing mouth parts. So these are the common plant-feeding true bugs. And many of them have population booms, and they'll suck the fluids from plants so quickly the plants can wilt before your eyes. Stink bugs are notorious garden pests, and they smell bad too. Bordered plant bugs often feed in groups, and you see pairs doing this a lot. And squash bugs are a common pest in vegetable gardens, and milkweed bugs feed on milkweed and oleander plants. Leaf-footed bugs fly well with a loud droning sound, and they are medium to large size and feed on fruits, vegetables, nuts, and ornamentals. So a few true bugs are predatory. The two-spotted stink bug preys primarily on leaf beetles. The rest of the bugs shown here can inflict a painful bite, so don't pick them up. And they use their long proboscis to inject lethal saliva into their prey. It liquefies the insides, which then they suck out. Ambush bugs are tiny and well camouflaged. They sit motionless on flowers and often take prey larger than themselves. Wheel bugs prowl the foliage by day and come to lights after dark. Their nymphs have a bright red abdomen that they hold erect. Assassin bugs, and this one is called a bee assassin, are efficient predators on other insects. Several species are in our area. And the milkweed assassin bug closely resembles milkweed bugs, and it feeds on a wide range of other insects. So this cone nose is included, so you'll know to stay away from it. Cone nose bugs are blood-sucking, about 1 inch long, and are usually found around wood piles, yard debris, and wood rat nests. Like many blood-feeding insects, they are also attracted to lights and carbon dioxide associated with human houses and dog kennels. They are nocturnal and sometimes bite people near the mouth or nose. Another name for them is the kissing bug, and they carry a parasite that causes Chagas disease.
Oh, boy.
So beetles are the largest order of insects, and they are by far the most diverse organisms on the planet. And out of all species of living things, including plants, 1 in every 5 is a species of beetle, and 1 out of every 4 animals is a beetle. Over 24,000 species are known in North America, north of Mexico. They have chewing mouth parts and develop through complete metamorphosis, that is, egg, larvae, pupa, and adult. Many are garden pests. Many are very destructive to crops, trees, flowers, and stored food products. But many species are beneficial as predators and pollinators in your garden. So these are some of the beetle pests that you've probably seen. Flower scarabs, and scarab refers to the taxonomic family of the beetle. June beetles, weevils, and cucumber beetles. And the larvae look like grubs and usually live underground where they feed on plant roots. This top stuff's not on their screen. Okay. All right. I just showed this one for those of you that grow roses. You've probably seen this beetle. Small, slender beetles. It's a common pest, usually associated with roses, but also eat other plants such as wild grape. And the chubby white grubs attack grass roots. One rose chafer usually is found in the company of other rose chafers, and they quickly ruin a rose blossom by nibbling away at it. They're difficult to remove thanks to their strong little legs, and many gardeners use chemicals to prevent or to remove them. Buprested beetles, again, buprested refers to the taxonomic family. Another name for them is flat-headed wood borers. The larvae are tree pests, but seldom attack healthy trees. Adults feed on foliage of injured or dying trees and pollen or flowers. And adults do some work as pollinators. And you may have seen the huge wood-boring Prianus beetles, sometimes called tile-horned beetles, because of their long segmented antennae. And larvae attack fruit trees and other trees, feeding in the crown and larger roots. Adults do not eat and are active at night. A huge group of beetles are called longhorn beetles, one of which is the Bumelia borer, a gorgeous but seldom seen wood-boring beetle, and the larvae feed on fallen trees. They're beneficial in a natural forest to help fallen trees decay. Adults feed on pollen, nectar, leaves, sap, and fungi. So these are examples of beetles that have root-feeding or wood-boring larvae, and the adult beetles feed on fruit and leaves. Our local ox beetle larvae live in rotten logs or high organic matter like compost heaps and occasionally in potting media, or they feed on grass roots in lawns. And the Hercules beetle larvae feed on logs, stumps, dead leaves, or rotten fruit. And you can tell by the fact that those larvae are held in a person's hand that these are really big beetles and really big larvae. So I included this one because it's interesting and you may occasionally see it on a rock or the bark of a tree. About 1 inch long, ironclad beetles are named for their very dense, hard exoskeleton. They move slowly and play dead when disturbed. There's not too much known about them. The adults are thought to feed on woody fungi and lichens on oaks. The larvae have been found in dead pecan logs. Adult live specimens of one of the Mexican species are decorated by jewelers and sold as living brooches. So when you live near livestock, you've seen these beetles, especially after a warm rain. They're not a true bug, but a member of the scarab beetle family. Males roll balls of dung, while females ride atop or assist alongside, and the pair eventually buries each sphere a few inches underground. The female lays an egg on the brood ball, the larvae feeds on the dung and pupates inside this protected space. These are very beneficial beetles that help fertilize and aerate the soil. And by burying the animal dung underground, they get rid of it quickly, which helps reduce the number of flies and other pests that breed in the dung. Texas ranchers have introduced additional species to help break down livestock manure more quickly. Their polka dot patterns and appetite for aphids make ladybird beetles among our favorite insects. Both larval and adult stages are terrific predators on aphids, mealybugs, and other small plant-feeding insects. The 1.5 inch long caterpillar hunter beetle is in the ground beetles group. Ground beetles are usually seen scurrying in all directions when you turn over a stone or a log. And beetles in this group are surprisingly long-lived, 2 to 3 years as adults, unusual in the insect world, and most are predatory. Most ground beetles are black, but this caterpillar hunter, also called a fiery searcher, is metallic green. And usually nocturnal, the adults and larvae are voracious predators of caterpillars and other insects. Tiger beetles are swift daytime hunters and beneficial predators of pest insects. Alert and sun-loving, they exhibit shorebird behavior: run, stop, run, fly a short distance if startled. Their wicked jaws and bulging eyes are distinctive. The larva lives in a vertical burrow using a hooked hump to brace its body against the inside walls. And poised with its wide flat head flush with the surface of the ground, it grabs insects and other invertebrates that happen by. Adult fireflies feed on nectar and pollen. The larvae live in soil, often near streams or ponds, and prey on other insect larvae and snails and slugs. Firefly populations are declining due to habitat loss, pesticides, weed killers, and light pollution. To provide habitat for fireflies in your landscape, reduce or eliminate artificial lighting and keep pesticides to a minimum. Net-winged beetles somewhat resemble fireflies and are commonly found resting on flowers or leaves in daytime. Adults feed on nectar and honeydew at aphid colonies, and their bold coloring warns predators that they don't taste good. Larvae live under loose bark in rotting logs or leaf litter and feed on small invertebrates, fungi, or fermenting plant juices. Soldier beetles, adults, are active in the daytime. They're valuable pollinators. They eat aphids and other insects. The larvae live in leaf litter or under other debris and prey on eggs and larvae of other insects. Carrion beetle adults and larvae eat decaying flesh and fly larvae. Sometimes adult beetles consume rotten fruit and fungi, anything that's stinky. And while their feeding habits are repulsive to us, these beneficial beetles aid in returning nutrients from dead things back into the ecological food web. Rove beetles are one of the largest families of beetles in North America, but most of the species are small and they're often overlooked. They're most commonly found under bark, logs, or rocks and at lights at night. They have the body shape of an earwig, but without the pinchers. And in a garden, the larvae and adults are beneficial predators of small insects and mites that infest plants. So true flies are another huge group and maybe our most underappreciated insects. Most of our experience is with the blood-sucking mosquitoes and horseflies, sweat-sipping, garbage-infesting, and picnic-harassing species. Meanwhile, we ignore the majority that are directly or indirectly beneficial. Many non-flies bear the word fly as part of their name, such as butterfly, firefly, mayfly, but true flies are described by two words. Many are bee or wasp mimics, but flies have a single pair of wings while bees and wasps have two pairs of wings. Flies generally do not have a waist between the thorax and the abdomen as do the wasps and bees. Beneficial flies fall into three groups: pollinators, predators, and parasites, with many serving different service as adults than they do as larvae. So some people think these flies look like Texas-sized mosquitoes, but crane flies are a large tan-colored fragile fly with long legs, and the larvae are often found under layers of decomposing leaves in wet locations in winter. Larvae of some species reportedly feed on the roots of forage crops, turf grasses, and seedling field crops, but not on vegetable transplants or garden plants. They feed primarily on decomposing organic matter and thus assist in the biological decomposition process. Adult crane flies emerge in spring and are harmless, only live a couple of days, and usually do not feed. And the crane fly's contribution to our ecosystem is largely beneficial. Robber flies are the largest beneficial flies in our gardens, and we have some Texas-sized ones. Their mouth parts are long stylets for piercing and sucking fluids from prey, so don't handle these flies because they can give a nasty bite. It's not uncommon to see an inch-long robber fly resting on a fence wire or a twig while it looks for prey to ambush. They are voracious predators on a wide variety of pests: beetles, wasps, grasshoppers, leafhoppers, and others. Unfortunately, they also sometimes capture honeybees and butterflies. Robber fly larvae are seldom seen. They resemble long, slender, light-colored worms with knobby projections on their bodies. And living in the soil or decaying wood, they consume organic matter, white grubs, beetle pupa, grasshopper egg masses, and other soft-bodied organisms. A great many flies are bee mimics, and these small, fast-flying bee flies are nectar feeders. Their hovering flight helps reinforce their resemblance to bees. They sometimes land on people, but they are harmless. And their larvae are parasitic on immature stages of other insects. Dance flies and long-legged flies are small, slender flies in the garden. Dance flies often gather in hovering, dancing swarms you see backlit in open areas. Male dance flies often capture prey to gift to the female. The long-legged fly is an active metallic green species. Adults and larvae are both of these flies are good predators on mites, aphids, and some smaller flies. Flower flies, also called syrphid flies because they are in the family Syrphidae. They are very common with almost 900 species in North America, and almost all are bee and wasp mimics. Some even buzz like bees and wasps. But remember, flies have only 2 wings, while bees and wasps have 4 wings. Some species have a habit of hovering in front of you as if they're taking a look at you. And despite their appearance, they are harmless and are valuable pollinators. The larvae are predators on aphids and other small insects. Tachnid flies are a large group of almost 1,300 very beneficial species. Adults may feed on nectar or seeping sap, but the larvae are voracious internal predators of many pest insects. The adult either lays an egg directly on the prey or they scatter eggs where the larvae will encounter a host. The larvae then feed internally on the host, avoiding major body organs until the host is consumed and the larvae pupates before hatching into an adult. Some tachinids are very host specific and others parasitize a wide variety of hosts. And the most common hosts are caterpillars. Forage flies are a highly diverse group of tiny flies, and common species run in a jerky fashion, fly a short distance and run again. In the larval stage, some species are scavengers and others are herbivores, others are predators or parasites. One of the most interesting is the headhunter fly, a parasite of fire ants. Native to South America, scientists are attempting to introduce it into the United States. The female, oh, we're having quite a thunderstorm here. The female hovers above the head of a fire ant and lays an egg at the base of the head. When the larvae hatches, it burrows into the ant's head and devours the inside, essentially making a zombie ant that eventually dies. The fly larvae then pupate inside the ant's head. The head often drops off the dead ant, and the fire ants cleaning house in the nest carry the heads outside where they're dumped. The adult fly hatches from the ant head and the cycle begins all over again. The flies terrorize fire ants so badly that the ants stop feeding and the colony dies out. Unfortunately, this particular species is less tolerant of cold than our fire ants are, and so introducing it has not been very successful in Texas so far. So Hymenoptera are the bees, wasps, and ants, often referred to as social insects, even though the majority lead solitary lives, sometimes called stinging insects, but many do not sting. Members of this group often have a narrow constriction of the body between the thorax and abdomen, and they have 2 pairs of wings, the hind pair smaller. And the worker castes of ants are wingless, as are the females of some wasps. There are approximately 17,000 species in North America, and we'll discuss only a few, the most common ones. So many hymenopterans are good predators, pollinators, and beneficial parasites. Bees are the busy pollinators so important to a vast number of plants, including many agricultural crops. The type of plant they pollinate often depends on the size of the bee and its tongue length. Bumblebees and carpenter bees have long tongues, so you often see them in deep-throated flowers, and they can look very similar, but bumblebees have fuzzy abdomens while carpenter bees have a shiny hiney. Bumblebees are our only native social bee, and they're important pollinators for squash, melons, beans, tomatoes. Indoor hydroponic tomato growers have developed a domesticated version for use in greenhouses. Bumblebees nest in the ground, and only young queens survive through the winter, and in the spring, the queen starts a new nest. Carpenter bees are solitary bees that construct nest tunnels in soft, weathered, and unpainted wood. The male often hovers close to the female's nest, chasing away rivals and other perceived threats. The males seem aggressive, but they don't have a stinger, but the female does have a stinger. So all true honeybees are native to the Old World. They were first introduced to North America by colonists in Jamestown in 1622. And beekeeping is a multi-million-dollar business. And it's well publicized that honeybee populations are threatened by mites, overuse of pesticides, and infiltration of the aggressive Africanized strains. There are many species of small and medium-sized beneficial native solitary bees. Sweat bees, plasterer bees, mining bees, leafcutter bees, mason, digger, small carpenter bees. Native bees are very, very important pollinators, and they are declining. So we can help them by planting native plants, reducing the use of pesticides, leave plant stems and dry debris in the garden as native bee habitat, and restore or preserve natural habitat, and support organic agriculture when we buy groceries. So if you ever see these half-moon shaped notches that appear to have been cut out of the leaves of your rose bushes or other shrubs, your garden has been visited by leafcutter bees. And these use the foliage they cut to make nest cells for their young. They cut a piece of leaf and formed into a nursery chamber where the female bee lays an egg, and she adds nectar and pollen to each little nursery chamber. Pesticide sprays won't stop the bee from cutting bits out of your leaves. So if you're being visited by leafcutter bees, it's best to leave them alone because of their high value as pollinators. Generally speaking, wasps can be differentiated from bees by their pronounced wasp waist between the thorax and the abdomen. Bees are hairy and wasps are less so. And to make it even more confusing, many mimic each other and other kinds of insects mimic them. So we often think that bees are good and wasps are bad. However, many wasps are important pollinators. And this is another very diverse group, and many wasp species prey upon or parasitize pest insects. Unfortunately, some wasp species are bad agricultural pests. So among the predators, the large red Polistes paper wasps we have so much trouble with around our homes are actually very beneficial. They feed on many garden insects, especially caterpillars. The large yellow and black cicada killer feeds on cicadas, and they generally are not aggressive. They nest in the ground, and the entrance mound to your garden, might be mistaken for the digging of a small rodent. The 1-inch long metallic blue wasps that you see around your yard are cricket hunters. And most of the wasps in the yellow jacket group, despite their other annoying habits, are useful predators. So probably the main negative in the wasp group is the habit of some to prey on spiders and bees. And one group of wasps called spider wasps prey on various species of spiders. And you've probably seen the big tarantula hawk that preys on tarantulas. But many of these wasp species are also good pollinators as adults visiting flowers. There's many beneficial wasps are parasitic as larvae, and there's many different species. Some, like the ichneumons, have long ovipositor, which they use to deposit eggs on or into caterpillars. and some can even drill into wood to deposit eggs on the larvae of wood-boring beetles. Many tiny micro wasps are extremely important parasites of agricultural pests like scales, whiteflies, mealybugs, aphids, and moth larvae. And without the wasps that prey on scale insects, some crops like citrus would be very difficult to grow. The white, cottony, or waxy coating you see on many scale and whiteflies are actually an attempt at creating a defensive barrier against these wasps. The red velvet ant is actually a wasp. The female is wingless. It's also called a cow killer, has an extremely painful sting. It parasitizes other wasps and bees. And the scoliid wasps are parasitic on the larvae of scarab beetles. So almost everyone is familiar with these mud nests on your porch and in your garage or in your shed. Mud daubers are solitary wasps. The female builds and provisions the nest with paralyzed spiders. She lays an egg on the host, then seals the nest and abandons it. The maggot-like larvae feed on the host, then pupate and overwinter in the mud nest. The black and yellow mud daubers build globular nests. The iridescent blue mud dauber takes over nests of the black and yellow mud dauber. And the pipe organ mud dauber builds nests of long parallel tubes. Adult wasps feed on nectar, honeydew, and the body fluids of the spiders they capture. And mud daubers are capable of stinging, but they're rarely aggressive. So there's miscellaneous other small solitary wasps. Sawflies are stingless wasps. Females use their saw-like organ to deposit eggs in leaves or twigs, and the larvae look like caterpillars. And while larvae feed on plants, the adults are pollinators. These other wasps that are shown here are also pollinators visiting flowers as adults. Potter wasps and mason wasps fill their nest with stung, paralyzed caterpillars and beetle larvae. Weevil wasps hunt small beetles and weevils as food for their young. And the small, beautiful metallic cuckoo wasp lays its eggs in the nests of other wasps and bees. There's many organisms that stimulate abnormal growths that we call galls on plants. And these are examples of two different types of galls on oaks. They're caused by various insects, mites, nematodes, fungus, or virus, and they can occur in many different shapes and forms. We often see these common gulls shown here on oak trees, and they're caused by the larvae of tiny gall wasps. They're not necessarily beneficial, but they certainly are interesting. And a female wasp lays eggs on twigs or leaf buds, and then when the egg hatches, the larvae stimulates the formation of the gall, which provides the larvae with food supply and a protective home. And there's a host of predators and parasites that exploit galls at the cost of the original occupant. The worker ants are usually wingless, while breeding adults are winged, and many ant species can sting. Some species are social parasites of other ants, and nearly all ant species are colonial. Ant colonies often host other insects, and some other insects resemble or mimic ants. Ants perform many ecological roles that are beneficial to humans, including suppression of pest populations and aeration of the soil. So many plants depend on ants for seed dispersal. Carpenter ants are predatory on many insects, but unfortunately have a wood-destroying habit also. The leaf-cutting ants are a large ant that builds large mounds, and a big colony can strip foliage from plants in an area over an acre. They take the foliage underground where they culture a particular fungus on it that the ants consume and feed to the ant larvae. And red imported fire ants have some strong negative effects, but they're also valuable predators. Fire ants suppress populations of ticks and chiggers, caterpillars, and other insects. And there are 3 species of native fire ants that occur in Texas. The red harvester ants collect seeds and dead insects and store them in their nests. The nests occur in open areas, so you're not likely to find one in your garden. However, there's no vegetation within a 3 to 6 foot circle around the central opening of their colony and along their foraging trails that radiate from the colony. Harvester ants do not invade homes or structures, and the red harvester ant is the preferred food of the Texas horned lizard, also called the horny toad. So finally, the Lepidoptera, the butterflies and skippers and moths. We all know them. Many of us have a great love for them. Most are basically good pollinators as adults, but their larvae are virtual eating machines. And butterflies are day flyers with clubbed antennae, and moths are mostly nocturnal with feathery antennae. So many moth caterpillars are extreme agricultural and garden pests, since most are plant feeders. And even though many adult moths are pollinators, most have larvae that are pests that their damage outweighs the benefits. On the other hand, adult moths and their caterpillars are an important food source for birds and bats and other animals. And some of the largest and prettiest moths are the silk moths, 2 examples that are shown here. As adults, they don't feed, they're short-lived, and they simply breed and lay eggs. They scatter their eggs, and the larvae feed primarily on trees, so they're not a serious garden or agricultural pest. The adult sphinx, also called hawk or hummingbird moths, are beautiful. They seek the nectar in flowers, and they're excellent pollinators, but their larvae are very destructive on a huge array of ornamentals and crops. And several species of sphinx moths are native to our area, and these are 2 of the most common. The white-lined sphinx larvae feeds on a wide variety of plants. They're powerful eaters and are known to form massive groupings capable of damaging crops and gardens. The tobacco hornworm, or Carolina sphinx caterpillar, can decimate tomato plants. So this is the little, I just thought I'd show you, this is the little worm that tends to sometimes demolishes your Texas mountain laurels. They're immune to the chemicals in the mountain laurel that keeps deer from eating the tree. And in fact, the caterpillar concentrates those chemicals in its body, which makes it toxic to most common natural enemies of other caterpillars. However, there are a few spiders and assassin bugs that will prey on the caterpillars and may help keep their populations in check. My favorite small moth is this little Indian blanket moth. I only see it when the Indian blanket flowers are blooming in the spring. It's perfectly camouflaged to match the flower, and their caterpillars feed on, no surprise, Indian blanket plants. Skippers are small lepidopterans with characteristics of both moths and caterpillars. They have short, fat bodies and small wings, muted colors, and are day flyers. When resting, many types, but not all, hold their wings in the jet plane position. They're named for their quick darting flight. There are many different species, and they're really hard to tell apart. Their small caterpillars feed on grasses, various weeds, and other plants, but are not major pests. Adult skippers are good pollinators. So the hill country is home to many beautiful butterfly species, and butterflies are beneficial pollinators and only minor pests in our gardens. Most butterflies do not mass their eggs, so you don't wind up with a lot of larvae on a single plant. Occasionally, some types will cause noticeable damage on gardens, but this is usually offset by the beauty of the adult. And our common black swallowtail larvae can do considerable damage to plants in the dill family. These 3 adult butterflies look very different, but their caterpillars look very similar. So the caterpillars of the black swallowtail don't have any tentacles on the body, and the monarch caterpillars have only 2 pairs of tentacles, whereas queen caterpillars have 3 pairs of tentacles. So the caterpillars of monarch and queen butterflies feed on milkweed plants. The Gulf fritillary is a common butterfly whose caterpillars can totally defoliate passion flower vines. But some gardeners, that may be a good thing, since sometimes passion flowers can be pretty invasive. So here's another swallowtail you're likely to see fluttering around in flowers. The two-tailed swallowtail is named for the two tails on each hind wing. This beautiful big butterfly has a wingspan up to 5.5 inches. The caterpillars feed on a variety of trees and shrubs. And when swallowtail caterpillars are disturbed or feel threatened, two yellow tentacles pop out of their head. The tentacles look like a little bit like the forked tongue of a snake. And this and the large eye-like spots on the body might be used to startle birds and lizards so they don't eat the caterpillar. The tentacles also have a stinky odor that repels ants, spiders, and other insect predators like the praying mantis. Sulphurs are medium-sized butterflies, usually some shade of yellow, orange, or white. And we have many different species and sizes in the hill country, and these are 3 of the most common ones. Sulphurs flutter about gardens energetically visiting flowers, and the caterpillars feed on plants in the bean family, aster family, and other plants. These are 2 of our most common hairstreak butterflies. There are several other species as well, and hairstreaks are very small butterflies. The hairstreak refers to the hair-like tails on the hind wings. The caterpillars are very small and very strange looking, and these 2 are named for the food plants that their caterpillars prefer, such as juniper and oak. So the larvae of many butterfly species are weed feeders, and do considerable beneficial duty by eating plants that we don't want in our garden. For example, the question mark and the red admiral butterfly, the larvae feed on nettles. The great purple hairstreak is a magnificent butterfly whose larvae feed on mistletoe. Painted lady caterpillars feed on a wide range of weeds, including cheeseweed. Common buckeye larvae feed on plantains and many other weeds, and common wood nymph caterpillars feed on many weedy grasses. So in conclusion, in your garden, use pesticides sparingly and with caution. Pesticides don't differentiate between the good bugs and the bad bugs. By disrupting the balance, you sometimes end up with a worse problem than you started with. Beneficial arthropods are fine creatures to have in your garden as long as you treat some of them with caution. It's good that we have them, because without them, the destructive arthropod species would probably cause a lot of us to starve. So they've been on this earth adapting and surviving more than 400 million years, and we've only been here a blink of an eye. So in reality, despite human egotism, it's the arthropods' world, and we're just visiting. So these are some of our favorite reference materials, these quick reference guides. You can get them at Riverside Nature Center, Wild Birds Unlimited, HEB, various bookstores, and elsewhere. You're probably all familiar with those. These are our favorite field guides, the Kaufman guides and the Peterson field guides. These are very useful. And that's it. And thank you, everybody. Okay.
That was excellent.
Not your share.
Diana, can you hear me? Sharon?
Okay. If you have any questions and you haven't put them in chat already, be sure to do so now, because now is the question and answer section. So far I have only 2 questions, so please add some more. Okay, the first question, hopefully you know this, is the greater arid land katydid native to the hill country?
Yes, it is. Yep, I've had them in my yard.
Okay, and just, I was wondering this too, are most of the insects that you featured in this, are most of those native here? Or all
Yes.
of them?
Yeah, yes, they are. Yes.
Very good. Okay, second question. and I have this question just because you always hear about bugs, and that is the general term for everything here. Is there, and maybe I missed it, but what are the characteristics that distinguish a true bug from all those other insects?
They have a triangular shield on their back. And that's one of
Okay.
the distinguishing characteristics.
Okay. Okay, the new question. You said the bumblebee is a social animal. Do they hive?
They have a small, yes, they do. Usually they're in the ground or maybe in a hollow tree.